Here we have my pride and joy, 1982 Toyota Starlet. May not seem like much, but it's going to be a great little machine with that Ford Ranger engine.
Okay, so those of you who know what a Starlet is are wondering, why are you going to put a Ford engine in it? And those of you who don't know what a Starlet is are very confused. Here's a little backstory. After I got out of school, I traded my sport bike and a little cash for a Focus SE. No, it's not the SVT, even though it has the wheels. The guy I bought it from said he shaved the head for a bump in compression, put a cold air intake on it, MSD coils, he lowered it. It made a lot of noise, it had a nice exhaust on it. My mom actually still has the car. The problems are that it's front wheel drive, which is not nearly as much fun as rear wheel drive. And I didn't really have much attachment to it, just because I didn't put this work into it. I didn't feel much ownership to the project, really, or incentive to continue. The one thing I did want to keep with that car and take forward with me on my next project was I love the engine. That high revving 4-cylinder was just a good responsive engine that I wanted to keep that style of engine in my next project. The problem with that is the east-west configuration of a front-wheel drive car doesn't fit well in a rear-wheel drive car. So the fix for that was Ranger also has a Duratec based engine. It was a 2.3 instead of a 2-liter engine. Different cam profiles, stuff like that. But that was the impetus. Why is Starlet, you might ask? Well, I guess everybody's got their quirks. But more seriously, I wanted a rear-wheel drive hot hatch. I considered MG GTs, AMC Gremlins. I actually didn't know about Chevy Chevettes at the time, but that's also a good option. Ultimately, though, the story of the Starlet was what won me over. So if you didn't know, in the 70s there was an oil crisis. And the late 60s to the early 70s was when America was having the muscle car, horsepower wars. We weren't really equipped for this game, so Japanese manufacturers like Honda Civic had been around since '72, and Toyota had been making a version of the Starlet in Japan since '73, but we didn't end up getting a version of it till 1981, which is kind of weird because we got the Tercel, which is a more traditional economy car with the front-wheel drive configuration, in 1980, so they had those cars competing at the same time. The Starlet didn't do as well as the Civic or the Tercel, because it was a rear-wheel drive car. Modern econo boxes are all front-wheel drive because of the mechanical losses that can happen when that power has to go all the way from the engine in the engine bay through a drive shaft to a rear end to the rear tires. That's a lot less efficient than modern front-wheel drive cars. However, rear-wheel drive is a lot more fun, and I think it's kind of cool that you don't see these cars every day. Now, it's kind of a shame to hack one up, but honestly, a stock Starlet, well, the stock engine had 58 horsepower from the factory, so that should be enough of a reason right there. But the reason that hot rodders like these cars, they have a history of being reworked for rally or drag racing, is the power to weight ratio potential for these cars. They have a small engine bay, but the potential is there. So it is a rare car, but it's only valuable because of the potential for a great power to weight ratio, and with a stock engine, that's just not possible. Now that we've got some backstory out of the way, we can get to the story of the Starlet. I found this car on just another Craigslist whim. I learned the story about it because I hadn't seen one of those cars before, and I had to have it. I was living with some family friends at the time, so I told these guys about the car, and they said they helped me pick it up, even though it was in the high desert of Prineville, Oregon, which was out of state at the time. I ended up being able to work on it for, quite a while in their driveway, so thank you guys very much. Once we got the car home, we just wanted to get it running, so we noticed a fuel delivery issue, so we changed the fuel filter. After we got good fuel delivery to the carburetor, we tested for vacuum leaks with some cigars. That was pretty funny. Then I proceeded to do the oil, the coolant. I think I put new front brakes on it. But to get everything running right, I really needed to rebuild the carburetor. So I ordered a kit and went about the tedious process of documenting all the parts so that it went back together correctly. I even drew some pictures just because I'd never done this before and didn't want to screw it up. Once I got the car back together, we put it back on the car, adjusted the idle and mixture screws, and it worked. It wasn't fast at all. We took a little test drive around, but it worked and I could move it around as I needed to. My girlfriend and I were finally able to get our own place, The Starlet was able to make it about a 40-minute drive to its new resting place. The rear end howled the whole way. Come to think of it, I can't remember if I ever checked the fluid of that thing, but we made it, and it's time to find an engine. I ended up picking up this running 2001 Ford Ranger for around $500, maybe it was $600, something like that. If you want to get a Duratec, you got to get 2001 to like 2012, and even 2001, I think it was a split year, because before that, Ford made what's called the Lima engine, which is a very old school single overhead cam 4-cylinder 2.3 liter engine. A version of the Lima engine with upgraded internals was in the Turbo Coupe and the SVO Mustang. So it's a pretty stout engine, but it's just old school technology. Now that I had my donor vehicle, I bought a cheap Chinese cherry picker and removed the engine from the Starlet. While the truck still had a motor in it, I took the opportunity to go get a Ford 8.8 out of a 97 Explorer in a local junkyard. These are great because they have an offset pumpkin. That way you can shorten one side and use the stock shorty axle to fit under a small vehicle like this. It also has rear disc brakes, and a lot of them, including this one, have a limited slip rear end. When you're picking a rear end, you want to make sure that the tag has the right gear ratio you want, and if it has the L in the gear ratio to indicate a limited slip. The 88 indicates that you have an 8.8 axle. After I got the rear end for the Starlet Build, I pulled the engine and trans from the truck. At that point, I was kind of thinking, what am I going to do with this truck with no engine trans and this 4KC 58 horsepower drivetrain? Yep, I put it in the truck. Now, this is not the typical solution for this type of problem, but I wanted to learn from making my own mistakes. So I learned about motor mounts, I learned a lot about labeling, about the fuel system, how to shorten cables, a lot of different skills that you kind of just learn from experience. So this was definitely a learning experience. So I can confidently, not so much proudly say, that I created the only Ranger with a 4KC engine in existence. Now I could get working back on the Starlet project. First step was to cut the long side of the axle housing. I measured the difference between the long side and the short side axle, and that's how much I took out. I used pieces of C-channel to clamp the axle housing back together to make sure everything stayed straight. I also inserted the axle and spun it occasionally to make sure that nothing warped in the welding process. For the suspension, I wanted to stick with the standard 4-link, so I measured the stock axle to get the bracket locations correct on the new axle, and I upgraded the links with some DOM tubing and Heim joints rather than the factory bushings. I simplified the rear suspension a little bit by cutting out the old shock towers and mounting coilovers from a 1997 Volkswagen Golf, which is relatively similar in weight. Here's where things take a bit of a turn. I ran into some fitment issues with this Duratec engine that I wasn't anticipating. I think if I ran into these issues today, I would have continued to pursue the project, but I'll let me from the past explain what happened next. The pan clearance, as well as the oil filter, that could be remotely located, but the way the pan is constructed, basically it just has a rear sump, which is very common on trucks. I didn't really know that at the time. Having to modify a truck oil pan to fit in a car application is very common. Yeah, the front cover there is kind of integrated into the oil pan. Right there is your oil filter location, which lines up almost directly with your crossmember. Also, one good thing is the exhaust is on the opposite side of the steering column, so that would have helped, but unfortunately I just think the clearances here are going to be a little bit too hard to manage. It's also a pretty tall engine. You can see that's about as far as it's going in there. Just kind of looking around at my project, I can give kind of an update on the rest of the car. I got spot set up and mounts for the fuel cell here, as well as I upgraded to coilovers. These are the custom towers I built, and those are mounting a Ford 8.8 rear end on there. This axle was shortened right here, you can see the weld. But yeah, so it's coming along slowly and surely. So I needed a new engine at this point. The obvious choice would be try something Toyota. You could go with the 4AGE, the engines they run in the AE86 cars, or 22RE would be another option, more common engine. Both of those engines are pretty old though. Try to use a 2ZZ, something like that. Really, I couldn't find any good domestic 4-cylinder rear-wheel drive Toyota engines. But then I found the Beams. If you don't know about the Beams Blacktop, it is a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine that outputs about 200 horsepower. It came with the J160, a 6-speed manual trans. This drivetrain came from a version of the Lexus IS300. This car was sold in Japan under the name Toyota Altezza. I think that's a pretty good time to end this first episode on the Starlet. I really just kind of wanted to show the history behind engine selection and some of the challenges you're faced with when you're trying to shove a bigger engine in a smaller car. I'll let past me kind of walk you around the car and show you what the state of things were when I was ordering my Beams engine. Right here, where we have the issue, the oil pan is a lot more forward on the Beams, so I think we'll be able to squeak by. And there's a video where a guy is talking about how he puts spacers in the front crossmember to space it down, and I might try to do the same thing here. I think I'll have to do it. Of course, it's going to take a lot of modifying of my tunnel. That's it for the first episode, but trust me, that engine is going in this car. Thanks for watching, and I hope you guys tune in for the next one.